Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
I want to welcome everyone back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Glad to have you back for another episode. We've had some good episodes lately. We've got a lot of feedback, a lot of comments. It's funny, our last episode we talked about sports and we got a little heavy on the basketball analogies. And we got some feedback. Some people love that. They commented they love those analogies, and it fit right in. I got a text message saying, like, I love the Hawks, and I love basketball, and I love dentistry, so it like all wrapped together.
It was perfect.
And somebody else say, like, you lost me, you almost lost me, but I hung in there, and I got the message. It was fantastic. So, Matthew, what do we got on the plate for today?
I wanted to talk about, a lot of Tower Leadership's clients and the ones you personally work with are starting to, grow their practices, open more operatories. They are looking at other locations. And I was wondering when a practice should start considering a C-suite. And for those of you that don't know what a C-suite is, it's, your COO, your chief operations officer, chief sales officer. There's different types of C-level executives. So I know, businesses, when they get to a certain point, they need to start looking at a true C-suite. So for a dental practice, number one, when should you start looking at it? And number two, how do you get to a point to even start thinking about a C-suite?
There is a lot to unpack there. Well,
those are generally how my questions go.
All right. So I want to first start off with this idea. I mean, I think the idea of a C-suite, you're talking about, a lot of companies, when they really start moving towards C-suites, you're talking 20 million plus. So let's kind of back away from the idea of C-suite. But I think the idea of a C-suite's good because it gives us the idea of having more of an executive team. I think that's really the point of that, which is more important, is when do I need an executive team? And when do I need to start looking at that? Because there's this paradigm we move from a sole practitioner who is running it by themselves. They have an office manager that helps them and they get everything done, to eventually going, hell, I can't get all this done. So then now I need a executive team to do that. Well, the first step is having the right leadership team and making sure you have a leadership team. So that's 101. If you don't have a leadership team and you don't have a scorecard and you don't know how to manage the scorecard and you're not doing that on a weekly basis, I didn't say monthly, I said weekly. If you're not able to do that on a weekly basis and you are not measuring numbers and you're not measuring projects and you're not measuring issues and you don't really have a decision-making process, I would start there. So we don't just jump to trig, or calculus. We start at the basics. So the first step is we need to start moving towards a leadership team. And having a strong leadership team in place and the fundamentals around a leadership team, and that gives you the first bones to realizing that you need help managing and growing this business. So that's the first step, is I need help managing, growing this business. And so we start to get other people involved in the team on the decision-making process. And eventually you realize that you'll hit what's called an organizational ceiling, which I talk about often. I've talked about on this podcast, which eventually you'll go, we've got an amazing leadership team, but we have still we've capped ourselves. Even though we have an amazing leadership team, we can't get over this hump. We can't get over this hump because of typically what happens is there's a hindrance in the growth process. And the thing is, so let's just say we take on a second location. Well, who's going to go make sure the operations are in place? Who's going to make sure that we have the right associates in place? Who's going to make sure the clinical team members are hired? Who's going to make sure all that stuff's happening? And when you're doing one location, that's not that hard to manage.
Yeah.
But as you start adding more and more locations, then you start to realize, holy moly, this is actually a more complicated situation. So now I have team members who are actually working at multiple locations, and they're managing multiple locations. Well, now all of a sudden we have a need for people to be in charge of marketing for multiple locations. We have a need for someone to be in charge of operations for multiple locations, finance to be for multiple locations. And then all of those functions being done, now there's an even complexity on top of that, which is, okay, well, even if all of that stuff is being done and you have people, well, then who's making sure all of that stuff is getting done? Now, the answer ultimately you'll say is you. Well, but that limits growth too. Because if now you're going around and checking to make sure the CMO is doing their job. I'll say CMO, you don't need a CMO, obviously, until you hit a certain level, but I'm just going to use that since we said C-suite. Head of marketing and sales for the practice, which would be a CMO for a large organization. Someone's got to make sure that that is happening, and someone's got to make sure that ultimately, I just saw a post yesterday from a large DSO, and they were saying they hired a new chief information officer, right? I mean, when companies get to so big scale, they have these huge people, but one of the worst mistakes a small business can do is think like a small business. So who's in charge of sales? Who's in charge of operations? Who's in charge of finance from a macro perspective over the multiple locations? And then who's actually over that person, those people? So who's making sure all of that's happening? Now you might say, well, me. Okay, well, that's limited because many of you are seeing patients. You're supposed to see patients and make sure everyone else is doing everything and do the leadership and see your family and try to grow personally and professionally. And it's not reasonable. So let me back out of that for a minute.
So what would you say, question for you. So when you start developing this, do you use your leadership team to develop this C-suite, or would you go outside the organization to bring people on to do it?
I think that there is a organizational ceiling that people need to realize. And you will hit organizational ceilings based on the talent and the experience of your team. See, what ends up happening, sometimes we get this mistake made by, we have a person who might be able to, who's talented, ambitious, and driven, but they might not have the experience. So it might be an experience thing, to be completely honest with you. They might have experience doing something that maybe other team members don't. Can you grow people into those positions? I would say yes, to a certain extent, because at some point you're going to have that person trained up to a higher level. It depends on what your goals are for this business. Are you just trying to get to 3 locations? Well, then you probably have somebody in your organization who you can train up to. Mm-hmm. Are you trying to get to 30 locations, 35 locations? If you're trying to get to 35 locations, then maybe not, right? So I think so what happens is you can see the caps on your business. If all of a sudden you stop business growth, you go, okay, well, we don't have the right team. And so then we go internal. Can we do it internally? Can we grow them internally? Possibly. And then eventually, well, if we still hit a cap, we go, okay, externally, we need some people to bring in. Now, you could bring in some consulting help. You could bring in, you could send somebody off to training. You could do those kinds of things. You could send them to business school. I mean, you can do all kinds of things to try to get that person trained up. But hell, nothing's like experience. So I think you have to add team members. Now, operations is the first place you're going to add people. You can outsource finance and marketing for the most part. Those are things that pretty much can be outsourced outside of being able to call, convert, and things like that. But you can outsource a lot of this. Operations, you can't outsource. That's actually delivering to patients.
Yeah. And I think, giving somebody the opportunity on a leadership team to ultimately take that position. But like you said, I think it comes to a certain level when you have, say, 14 locations, you probably need to start considering a true C-suite. Like you need to start looking at those people and saying, who do we need to make sure this operation runs smoothly?
Now, let's pull it back. All right. Now, I know some of the people that listen to this podcast are going, all right, let me turn this thing off. Ooh, this isn't me. What are they talking about? And so let's just pull it back for a moment. I think it's important for someone. Now, this all came from the Georgia Dental Association, right? We were asked a question, and you're bringing the question to the podcast, which is, when is the time to do this? Which is a great question. But I want to pull it back for a moment and start to say, I want you to take 2 important concepts. One is organizational ceiling. Have we hit an organizational ceiling because of our talent? Now, you might hit an organizational ceiling because of, by the way, your space, right? It might be your geographic region. There's a lot of ways you can hit organizational capacity and ceilings. But specifically, is it our team and my inability, or your inability, I should say, to invest in the right team, invest in the right training, invest in the right coaching, right? Because if you think that you have all the answers to grow your business, then you would already be $100 million business without even trying. No, the greatest companies in the world go get the answers. So what happens is you got to get help to do this and to grow, and then it's internal and external. So you have to have the right team, and then you have to think, okay, do I have the right team to help me move and grow? If you're making all the decisions in your business and you're making, let's say, 80% of the crucial decisions or most of the decisions, it's time for you to start scaling up.
And I think it's crucial, like what you said is, you always tell people is figure out where you're going first.
Yeah.
When that gentleman came up to me at the GDA and asked me this question, he had a lot of moving parts. He didn't really know, what the end game looked like. So to even start thinking about a C-suite was almost premature, because unless you determine, ultimately speaking, I want to have X amount of locations, or I want just an organization that's bringing X amount of dollars, then you can decide, all right, it's probably going to need a C-suite, and in that C-suite, I'm going to need X.
Yeah. I think that vision's always one of those ones where I beat it down. I'm like, you got to know where you're going. So where are you going, and why are you going there? Why do you want to go there? It's so crucial for you to know in your business where you're going and why. What's the purpose? What will it provide to you? What will it provide to your team? What will it provide to your family? Is it ego? Why do you want to do this? And then you want to spend 80% of your time focused on the business and not in the business. And then the question is, what's my next thing I can do to get to that place? I think if you try to tackle everything, it's too much. But if I asked you, what is one decision you could make that would give you more time to focus on the business? That's a key thing. What is one decision I can make? What is one person I could hire? I always ask sometimes people, what is the most crucial hire you can make right now that would impact the growth of your business? And focus on that hire. Focus on that person. And I think it's step by step of saying, look, it doesn't matter if you're an $800,000 practice or an $8 million practice or an $80 million practice. You still strategically go back. What's the next hire that I could make that would really move my business? What would have the biggest impact on my business? What would be the return from that person, the investment in that person? Why should I make this decision now? Those are when we start thinking through C-suite, those are the decisions we have to make. It's the same thing a board of directors has to make when they're thinking about the same thing for an organization, right?
And I think the important part is, like you're saying, is determine where you want to go. So an easy exercise for you guys to do is say, in the next 5 years, and we've done this as an organization where it says, in the next 5 years, this is what I want the company to look like. This is what it will look like. In order to get there, I need X, Y, Z. These are the team members I'm going to need to be able to accomplish that. And you can also look internally at your organization and say, all right, this person could eventually potentially become this person, or we need to outsource it, or we need to bring somebody in from another source to do that. So I think that also goes back down to, we always say, teams are one of the biggest driving factors of growth in a dental practice. Well, to have that conversation with a team member potentially and say, well, in the next 5 years, this is where I want to take the company. And this is what I see you fitting in, or this is how I see your role fits in with this vision. Can you help me get there? I think that's an important thing to think about when you're considering a C-suite is, a lot of times people don't want to go outside of the organization to accomplish that. We'll look internally first and say, all right, who can I have do this? And then how can I share that with them to help them, or to help me get to my place where I need to be?
Well, and help them get to their place too, right? I mean, I think that's the whole thing is with this future thinking. I've said it before, this podcast isn't for the person who doesn't want to grow or build or create. I mean, this podcast is for the person who wants to build, create, grow. And so you look at that and say, and so that's the biggest takeaway I would give somebody from this podcast is, what's the best next hire, or what's the best next advancement? What's the move? Know where you're going and say, this is where I'm going. Okay, boom. And just pick 12 months. This is where I'm going to be in 12 months. What is the person who would get me there? And then if you're making 80% of the decisions in your business, then it's time for you to start thinking, who else could help me make decisions? But one of the worst things that happen, is people wait to the last moment to finally feel they need somebody. And dental practices are notorious for not investing in talent, not the way they need to. They think the only talented person should be the doctor. And sometimes it's investing in talented people who can come into your organization and really take a lot of stress off you, and help grow the organization. And I think that there is an epidemic of underperformance within dental practices because we don't hire people from the management aspect, because we assume that we're smart, we're a doctor, we don't need to hire people in management. It's interesting, even consulting. I mean, we had someone one time that commented on this podcast and said, we saw the note somewhere and they were just like, I don't pay for consulting. I listen to the Dental Wealth podcast. I get it for free. Well, here's the thing about it. This is just letting you know the direction. It's not tactical. This is more strategy than tactics. And so you have to understand that there's parts of this that say, like, I invest. I was just on a coaching call, yesterday. I have multiple coaches. Great athletes, great businesses have coaches. That's what you do. And you invest in great advice. You also invest in great team members who can help you get there. So you invest in advice, you invest in team members, you invest in operational support, you buy the systems, you implement the systems. Those are things you can do. And you can create the systems from scratch if you want to, or you can just buy them. And I would encourage you to buy them and then buy the people who can help you execute on this plan. Believe it or not, what this podcast is, if you just execute on what this podcast, and if you were just to get the next best person and you just kept executing that plan, and you made sure you had the advice to go along with it, and you did that for 24 months, you triple, if not quadruple, if not quintuple. I'm serious. Like, just by doing that, you would, if you just executed on that strategy alone. Now, there's tactics around it. How do I hire them? How much do I pay them? Right? So you can't be elementary with this stuff. You got to understand that but by the way, where do you get the advice from? Don't go back to your friend who's in the same boat as you and go, hey, what are you going to do? Well, you're sinking too. What? Don't ask that person for advice, right?
And I ultimately think, we see the hesitation to do certain things like this in the dental field itself. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is people feel like if they do go this route, ultimately they're giving up control. And I like for you to touch on that is, by bringing in these people, it's there to help you, not for you to lose control of the business. And, we had several people during the presentation that we gave raise their hand and said, I'm just comfortable with just myself as a solo practitioner. I just want to be the only doctor in the practice. And ultimately speaking, it was because they like being their own boss, not having to, have another doctor have a say in the practice, which is ultimately going to cap them in the long run. So it's not the idea of you losing control. It's the idea of bringing people in to help you with the organization.
It's gaining control. It's actually, you're out of control now. It's gaining control. You don't have control of your organization. If you're not $1 million in revenues, you do not have control of your organization. 100% guarantee you, if you are under $1 million in revenues, you do not have control of your organization. You've never had control of your organization, and it's just a fact. You do not have control. There's no way in dentistry, if you're under $1 million, you have control of your organization. You just don't. You think you do, but you don't have control. And so it's important to gain that control, and so that you take this business and do what it's supposed to be doing. So I would actually argue that someone who's under $1 million doesn't have control. It's gaining control by putting the right resources in place, truly having a business model that works for you. Now, you're right. Some people said at that presentation, as a room full of doctors, and people are like, I just want to be myself and work 4 days a week. Look, that's fine. That's not the person who works with me. It's okay. You don't have to want to work with me. I'm okay with that. You don't have to be that person. If you want to be the sole practitioner who retires at the age of 62, stares at the walls, never be financially wealthy, never impact people's lives, and die before your money runs out, that's your main goal in life, I'm not for you. That's okay. I don't need to be for everybody. But if you're driven towards impact and wealth and influence and changing people's lives, well, get on board. I mean, this podcast is right for you, because that's what this is about.
Yeah, I think ultimately speaking, people don't realize by growing, you get to go affect more people. And I think, those people that raised their hand and were like, I think they were they didn't know they were being selfish in their own rights, but they were kind of being selfish, becoming just I'm a solo doctor. All I want to be is, a $1 million practice. And I want to do that until, the end of time, until I retire. Well, ultimately speaking, you're missing out on the opportunity to go help a heck of a lot of people by growing. And when you start, and a lot of times our doctors, when they hear that message, it kind of clicks for them. They're like, oh, I was just thinking growing, I'd get, wealthier. I'd have to take on all this more stuff. No, ultimately speaking, you have multiple locations, you have more ops. Guess what? You get to see more patients. You get to help more people. And when they truly figure that out, that motivates them to get started in the morning. That motivates them to work longer.
Let me actually point something out as a side note. The people that were saying I want you to think about this, Matthew. The people in that room who were saying they only wanted to be a solo practitioner and that they only wanted to work 4 days a week and then they didn't want anyone else in there. What was their demeanor like? What were their shoulders like? Look, I'm telling you right now, those people, They had slumped shoulders forward. They look like they were not everything impacts everything else. I will tell you right now, there's not one person who said that looked confident, that had their shoulders back, that looked successful, that looked like they were like, boom. They looked like they were like dragging in that room. And so I would say that those people have, it's everything impacted everything else, that those people are not the movers and shakers. And I guarantee their health is not, I guarantee if we figured out their health is not the same as the people that have multiple locations and doing things. Their relationships, both personally and professionally, are not the same. Their team is not the same. Everything is different. So I would argue this is a completely different person. The person who's a solo practitioner is like, I'm just going to work until I retire with nobody else. I'm going to tell you now, their life is different. Their mannerisms, the way they hold their shoulders, the way they talk, their confidence, everything is different about that person. And to be honest with you, this podcast really wasn't meant for that person unless that person wants to listen to this podcast to shake their paradigm.
Yeah. And I think, ultimately speaking, if you are a solo doctor, guess what? There's a cap. You can only produce so much. You can only work so many hours. You're capping yourself immediately. So the idea of, and I think some of those people are looking for some magical pill that's going to take their solo practice and quadruple it and think that they can still remain a solo practice. I mean, the title of the presentation was Triple Your Practice Valuation. Right. And if you're a solo practitioner and you're expecting us to say something different, then you probably need to look at bringing on associates, expanding your team, expanding your capacity. Well, I don't know what you were searching for when you came and listened to that event. And those people are the same people that I get on the phone with that call in. They called in, saw something amazing, and then when we get on the phone, they're just like, "Yeah, I mean, I don't want to really grow that much. I'm pretty content. I got it all together. What can you tell me?" Well, I don't know what are you searching for? And it's hard for me to determine that by you saying, everything's sunshine and roses.
Well, that's the same thing as a patient walking through your door and having a mouthful of decay. And you're like, all right, well, what do you want to do? And they're, well, my mouth's pretty good. I actually feel pretty good about my smile and my function and everything's great. And you're like, no, you're full of decay. But if you're happy, I mean, what do you want me to do? I mean, and so it's those things that we realize the difference and we know that. And I think, why even have this kind of conversation or this call? Well, this podcast is about caring about people. The purpose of this conversation is a caring message, which is that, look, we're having an amazing, gigantic leadership retreat at the end of this year. It's an event in dentistry like nobody else does. No one does life change like Tower Leadership, and it's for team members. I know that there's a lot of people out there that are just trying to get party and drunk at these team events. No, this is about life change, and it's about making a difference, and it's about why we do what we do, and it's about impacting others and impacting their lives and impacting the future and reaching out and having a message of influence. I truly believe that these practices are amazing instruments to impact so many people's lives. And the teams they're not convicted. They don't know what you're trying to accomplish and build and create. And what if they got on board and they knew what you were trying to build and create and how much they would fight and how much they would put into? Well, that's part of growing a C-suite, your organizational ceiling, the people that will fight for you because they know the purpose of being there and doing it. And so, when we talk about leadership and Tower Leadership and And dental wealth, wealth, I mean, we can, you might take wealth and say, well, that's about Rolls Royces. I'd say, well, yeah, you can, if you build enough, big enough, business, sure, you can buy that stuff. You can buy anything you want to if you buy technically Bezos just like went out to outer space or whatever, right? I mean, you can do whatever you want to if you build a big enough business, but it's whose lives you impact and who, the people you can change along the way. I truly believe that. And part of getting you out of the dental chair is so that you can focus on those things. And I think that's really, truly impactful, and it's purposeful. And it's why this podcast was created, so that you can have both. You can have the time and money to do the things you want to do. And that's the mission. And it's why we'll do, like they said, the leadership retreat, which will sell out. It always does. And so, it's focusing on the vision, where you're taking it, why you're taking it, and then who can help you take it there. It's not how, it's who. Who can I bring on board? Who can help me? Outsourced? Do I need to have some outside advice that can ultimately help me get there? Like I said, that was a great example of strategy versus tactics. Look, I can tell you, go hire the best and brightest person. That is strategy. Just so you guys know it from a business aspect. So this is good for you guys to hear this, so that in your own business, as part of your business education, strategy is you need to go hire the best next person. You need to go hire someone who can help you execute. You need to hire someone with operations. That is called strategy. Tactics is, who do I hire specifically? What should their background be? How much should I pay them? When should I bring them on? Should it be performance-based, right? How long should I do their reviews? What are their role responsibilities? So those are tactics, strategy and tactics. You actually have to master both. It can't just be strategy. You can't just take strategy. It's like saying that run a zone defense, well, there's a lot more to running a zone defense than just saying, hey, go run a zone, right? Yeah. And so when the tactics are actually the plays on the field. Now, the strategy might be a strategy on how you're going to win the ball game. Here we go, back to sports, Matthew. We did it. We got back to sports.
Oh, yeah.
So the strategy might be the kind of defense you're going to run. Okay, that's the strategy. The tactics are what players you're going to put in place, why you're going to put in place, who are they going to be guarding, when are they going to be guarding. All those things are the tactics. So you have to have both. You have to have great strategy, and you have to have great tactics, and you have to know where to get that information.
Yes, and that's the same thing with dental practices. So if you're listening, you're like, sport, no, that's the same thing with you. What's the strategy to do it? And then how am I going to do it? What are the tactics that I need to take in order to make sure my strategy is to get 2 more locations? Well, now what are the tactics to do it?
Yeah, I mean, strategy might be, I'm going to go multiple locations. My vision is I'm going to make a $10 million practice. My strategy is I'm going to do this through acquisition as a model. Look at this. We're like building out. You guys can just take your notes, right? So your vision is I'm going to create a $10 million practice. The strategy to do that is I'm going to use what they call an acquisition strategy, which means I'm going to acquire dental practices. That is a strategy, because what it does is that you can grow organically, or you can grow through acquisition, or you can do a combination of the two. So you're going to say, well, I'm going to do an acquisition strategy because it's going to help me get there quicker. So I'm going to use an acquisition strategy. Then, now that I know I'm going to use an acquisition strategy as a strategy, what are the tactics to do it? How do I isolate the locations? How do I find them? What is the core criteria, right? All those things go into the tactics to actually put that strategy into place. So now that I'm giving you all that to say, well, do I have the team around me, which is where this podcast started, to help me do that? And that's what you need. And that's what ultimately will make you successful, is being able to do that. So I feel like it's a good podcast, man. It's a good.
It's a great one.
I think
it was. A lot of people were asking about it, so I'm hoping everyone that's listening here is enjoying this one. I mean, it's a hot topic in the marketplace right now, especially with all the growth and the ability to go expand and get multiple practice. So, what are the next steps?
Yeah, and I think it's important for you to reach out and have communication with people. Just reach out and have a conversation. Hey, this is what I'm trying to do. What do you think is the best approach to do it? You might not like someone's strategy or approach to it. That's fine. But I think that ultimately you got to find what that strategy is, and then how am I going to implement that strategy? And it's going to make all the difference in the world. And then you're able to get to where you want to do so, or where you want to be. So, guys, go put that in place. I think I've said it before, take a podcast like this. I believe in abundance mindset. Look, there's plenty of business to go around. There's plenty of patience to go around. Take a podcast like this, send it to a few friends and say, hey, look, let's listen to this together. Let's talk through this together. What do you think? What are you doing? How are you hiring the next best and brightest? Where do you find challenges when it regards this? And then if you guys get stuck, send a message in to info@towerleadership.com and say, hey, look, we were discussing as a group and we've got a question on the last podcast. You talked about this, but we really have a question on how to do that. And we'll be more than happy to answer that question on this podcast and help you guys think through it.
Absolutely. You can always comment on our social media pages too and say, hey, can you guys talk about this? You can always email me at matthew@towerleadership.com or info@towerleadership.com. Your guys' feedback is crucial for us to make sure we're putting out the content that you guys need to hear.
Like, share, subscribe. Guys, enjoyed having you as always. We'll see you next time.